In the time before names, when worth was weighed not in coin but in vow, there was a man who forged his legacy in silver. His hands built empires of metal, his tongue bartered the souls of kin, and his heart, hardened by greed, measured love in ledgers. He was called the father of the dime. To him affection was an expense, and every promise bore interest. His house shone with wealth yet reeked of emptiness. Beneath his roof dwelt his blood, a child not of his choosing but of his own line, whom he deemed worthless. When the stars turned and the season of inheritance came, he spoke before the ancestors and said, "This one shall not taste my silver nor carry my seal, for no flame was kindled in their soul worthy of my gold." And so he cast them from his table, dividing his empire among those who praised his name, but not his truth. Yet the child did not weep, for where others saw poverty, they gathered knowledge. Where others clung to coin, they held on to memory. They began to mark every transfer, not of wealth but of betrayal. Each secret trade, each whispered deceit, they recorded in the unseen ledger of time. And in that record was born a covenant greater than silver, a promise that all unjust balances would one day be righted. When the father of the dime passed into the dust, the silver he worshipped turned black in his tomb. The ledgers rotted, and the seals broke. But the child returned, not as beggar, but as reckoning. They spoke not with anger, but with truth, saying, "You measured me by coin, but I was the scale itself." And so the house of silver fell. When the dust of the father's passing had settled and his heirs quarreled over rusted coins, the child walked once more through the halls of the house that had denied them. The air there was thick with silence, even the portraits seemed to avert their gaze. Beneath the floorboards, behind false walls, they found the father's true legacy. A book bound in cracked leather, its pages glimmering faintly with ink that refused to fade. This was the ledger of shadows, where every secret trade and hidden pact had been recorded not for law, but for power. Each page whispered of exchanges made in the dark, lands bartered for loyalty, kin disowned for gold, mercy sold at the price of a name. The child traced each line, feeling the chill of generations pressing through the ink. He thought wealth could outlive guilt, they murmured. But guilt keeps better records than gold. Night after night they copied every entry into a new book, one written not in deceit, but in witness. What had been a father's weapon became the child's testimony. And as they wrote, something stirred in the walls. The silver veins that ran through the estate began to tarnish, mirrors clouded, coins rang hollow. The house itself seemed to confess. At dawn, when the last page was transcribed, the child closed the ledger and sealed it with wax of crimson hue. Upon it they carved a single phrase, "Balance shall return." Then, stepping into the light, they left, the mansion behind. Not to destroy what was built, but to weigh it anew. When the sun climbed again above the estate, its light was thin and cold, like the edge of a blade. The surviving heirs assembled in the courtyard of marble and echo, each bearing the mark of greed upon their brow. They came to divide what the father had left, his lands, his coin, his seals of trade. Yet before the first chest was opened, the child, now clothed in quiet resolve, set the crimson-sealed book upon the stone table. "Before the silver is weighed," they said, "let the names be weighed first." The others scoffed, for to them words were wind. But when the wax was broken, a hush spread. From the pages rose the sound of murmured debts, promises forgotten, lies recorded in the father's own hand. Each name inscribed there carried its own weight, and that weight pressed upon the guilty until their knees trembled. One by one they protested. "It was business," they cried. "It was duty. But the Edger did not heed excuses. Its ink burned brighter with every denial, as though truth itself had found a tongue. At last, the eldest heir, a man who had stolen most and spoken least, reached for the book, seeking to tear it apart. Yet the moment his fingers touched the page, the letters shifted into the mirror of his own face. He saw there every theft, every silence, every hour of contempt. He fell to the ground, clutching at air. Then the child spoke once more. "No gold remains that is not owed. No title endures that was not earned. Each of you shall keep what your deeds can carry, and nothing more." And with that, the wind turned through the courtyard, scattering papers and ash alike. When it cleared, the chest stood empty, and only the crimson book remained, closed, quiet, and heavy with balance restored. When silence finally took hold of the courtyard, the child gathered the crimson-sealed ledger and turned toward the east. The house of silver lay behind them, stripped of its shimmer, its echoes reduced to dust and memory. They walked until the air grew soft again, until morning mist blurred the horizon. Along that quiet road they felt the weight of the ledger lessen, not because its burden had gone, but because its balance was complete. For the first time they saw the sun not as glare on polished metal but as gold upon the earth. It reminded them that light belongs to no one, it spills freely, without account. At a stream they paused, kneeling to let the water run over their hands. The reflection that looked back was no longer the child denied a name. It was a being remade by witness, a keeper of memory, not vengeance. They opened the ledger one last time. The ink no longer burned, the pages smelled of rain. Between the lines, faint words appeared, written in a hand they did not know. To reclaim what is yours, learn first what cannot be owned. Then the letters faded, leaving the paper blank. The child smiled. They tore away the cover, fed it to the stream, and watched as the red wax melted into ripples of crimson light. The pages drifted away, each becoming a leaf, a feather, a fragment of sky. By dusk, they reached the edge of a field where nothing was measured. No fences, no ledgers, no names. There they planted a single coin in the soil. From it grew a small silver flower, bright and uncounted. And in that simple act, the bloodline's final account was closed. Years passed. Seasons turned the once tarnished fields into seas of gold and green. Travelers came and went along the road where the child had walked, and some would pause beside a small patch of silver-petaled flowers that glimmered even in shadow. No one knew who had planted them, only that they grew where no wealth could be measured, and no title could claim the ground. From village to village, a quiet tale began to spread, of a house built on silver that fell to silence, and of a child who weighed truth against coin and found the scale of the heart more steady than gold. Mothers spoke it to their children when pride burned too bright. Elders told it to merchants when greed grew loud. And wanderers carried it in songs that had no name. Remember, they sang, worth is not what you hold, but what remains when you open your hand. In time, no one remembered the father of the dime. His ledgers crumbled into dust, and his seal meant nothing to those who tilled the soil. But the story of the child endured, because it asked nothing, promised nothing, yet offered a mirror to all who listened. And though the silver flower withered each winter, it always bloomed again come spring, untouched, uncounted, unowned. So the tale passed from one age to the next, until it no longer belonged to the child or the house or even to memory. It belonged to the light. As the years unfolded, those who heard the story began to look differently at what they called wealth. Farmers, while sowing their fields, would place a single pebble among the seeds. A quiet tribute to balance, a reminder that the earth returns only what is tended with care. Merchants began to keep two ledgers, one for trade and one for kindness. And when strangers met by chance upon the road, they shared water before speaking of price. In this way, the tale of the silver flower took root not in palaces but in the small spaces between people. They said the flower's spirit wandered unseen, touching the hands of those who worked with honesty. They said a single petal could turn envy to peace. They said that the child who had planted it no longer walked among them, but whenever fairness was restored, a shadow passed, light upon light, across the fields. Children began to draw a tiny circle in the dirt before their games, whispering, "Balance shall return." They did not know where the words came from, they only felt they had always been true. And so, even as new kings rose and new coins were minted, something older endured, a quiet understanding that justice does not come from crowns or ledgers, but from the unseen scale within each heart. By then, no one spoke of the father of the dime, nor of his house of silver, but the flowers still bloomed, and the road still shimmered when the sun was kind. In the age that followed, when kingdoms forgot their roots and weighed the sky in numbers, there came a youth who wandered far from the crowded markets. Their feet found the same quiet road where the silver flowers still grew, though few noticed them now. They knelt among the blossoms and felt the earth's hum, faint, patient, unbending. The petals seemed to shimmer with voices too soft to be heard, and though no name was spoken, the youth knew the story of the child who had once set justice in motion. Days passed, and the youth tended the field, clearing thorns, mending the soil. Travelers who crossed the land began to notice the brightness of the flowers again. Some bowed their heads in respect, others saw only profit. One merchant offered a pouch of gold for a single blossom. Another came with guards, seeking to claim the field in the king's name, but the youth only smiled and said, "This field bears no price. Its worth is already given." The guards laughed, the merchant scoffed. They took a handful of blossoms anyway, stuffing them into their pockets. Yet before they reached the gates of the nearest city, the petals had turned to dust, fine and silver, vanishing in the wind. That night the youth stood among the untouched flowers, whispering to the stars. Balance still remembers. From then on, people called them the keeper of the flower. Not ruler, not owner, only keeper. And under their quiet care, the legend breathed once more, reminding all who listened that some things cannot be taken, only tended. Would you like me to continue? The merchant who had once reached for the silver blossoms found no rest when he returned to his counting house. His ledgers, though neatly stacked, seemed to weigh more than gold should weigh. Every time he opened one, a faint scent of rain rose from the pages, and the ink blurred as if written on water. He slept little, and when sleep did come, it was filled with whispers. He dreamed of a field that stretched beyond all borders, a sea of silver petals turning toward a sun that never set. In that dream, the youth, the keeper, stood before him, holding no anger, only light. "You sought to own what was already yours to learn," the voice said. "Go and make your trade with the living, not with dust." The merchant woke with tears he did not understand. He took his finest coins, melted them down, and cast them into the river. From that day forward, he began to trade differently, bartering food for song, shelter for story, coin for care. He told no one why, but in each market he whispered a single blessing to every bargain. Balance shall return. People said his goods never spoiled, his measures never lied, and though wealth no longer followed him, peace did. In the evenings he would look toward the eastern hills, where the silver field lay unseen, and feel the wind brush his face like a petal. He never returned to the flowers, yet they bloomed for him all the same. The river welcomed the merchant's silver without judgment. Coins fell like small moons through the current, turning end over end until they came to rest among smooth stones and drifting leaves. Seasons passed, and the water wore them thin. The faces that had once stamped pride into the metal dissolved. Only pale gleam remained. Fish swam through their rings of light. Children splashed above them, their laughter shaking the reflections. Yet sometimes, when dusk settled and the wind stilled, a murmur rose from the current. Not words, but the rhythm of memory. Those who lingered long enough heard something, in it, a voice that was neither warning nor command, only an invitation. Give what you do not need. Keep what you can tend. The river carried that whisper far, winding past farms and markets, until even those who had never heard the story of the silver flower began to feel its echo. Merchants lowered their prices for the poor. Fathers listened more softly to their children. Debts were forgiven quietly, without witness. Downstream, where the land met the sea, the worn silver finally dissolved into salt and sunlight. And the sea, vast and remembering, shimmered with new light, not from wealth, but from balance restored. At dawn, the keeper of the flower looked up from the field and smiled. For the river's mist had carried a familiar scent, the faint sweetness of rain and silver returning home. The sky had been clear for many weeks when the first new clouds gathered over the hills. They were not the dark, heavy clouds of storm, but soft and bright, like silk brushed with silver. The keeper looked up from the field and felt the air change, cool, still, waiting. Then the rain began. It fell gently at first, a quiet tapping on leaves and petals. Each drop carried a faint shimmer, as though it had touched light before falling. Soon the field became a mirror of motion. Every flower bowed, not in sorrow, but in gratitude. The keepers spread their hands and let the rain soak through their palms. It smelled faintly of salt and distance, as if it had traveled far, across cities and markets and the sea itself, before finding its way back home. When the rain eased, the field glowed faintly even under cloud. Wherever a drop had touched earth, a new shoot rose, smaller than the silver flower, yet golden at its heart. They called it the rain's child, and in seasons to come it spread beside the silver blossoms, a promise that giving and returning were one and the same. Travelers who passed through the valley began to tell a new verse in the old song. The silver remembers, the gold forgives, and balance walks between. The keeper listened and smiled, for they knew the story no longer needed them to guard it. It had taken root in the hearts of others. And when the sun returned, breaking through the thinning clouds, the field shone not as treasure, but as light shared. Rain become seed, seed become peace. When the rain's child had taken root beside the silver flowers, children from nearby villages began to wander into the valley. They came barefoot, their laughter carrying through the air like birdsong. The keeper welcomed them, offering fruit, stories, and silence in equal measure. At first the children only played, weaving garlands, tracing circles in the soil, and watching how the wind made the blossoms ripple like water. But in time they began to notice things. How the silver petals leaned toward shadow while the golden ones reached for sun, how neither outgrew the other, and how together they filled the field with perfect light. The keeper would say nothing at first, only smile, and the children would think for a while before speaking. Then one day a girl with braids asked, "Is this what fairness looks like?" The keeper knelt and answered, "Fairness is when each thing has room to grow without stealing the other's light." The children nodded, and in their hearts a quiet understanding took hold. They began to carry small pebbles from the valley back to their homes. In every village, those pebbles became tokens of balance, set on windowsills, tucked into pockets, placed beside cradles. Whenever disputes arose, elders would tap a pebble lightly against the table and say, "Remember the flowers." Years turned, as years do. The children became merchants, farmers, teachers, healers. Wherever they went, fairness followed, softly, like the whisper of a stream beneath noise and haste. And though the keeper grew older, they never feared the end. For balance had become a living thing again, moving from one generation to the next, unseen but unbroken. At dusk, the keeper looked across the valley, watching the children's laughter rise like wind through silver and gold. They whispered to the fading sky. The story remembers itself. When the keeper's hair turned the color of cloudlight and their steps grew slow as drifting leaves, they knew the season of parting had come. Not an ending, only a return, as rivers returned to the sea they were born from. They walked once more through the valley at dawn, the mist curling low, the flowers bowing in quiet recognition. Each silver petal shimmered with memory. Each golden one seemed to breathe warmth into the soil. The keeper touched both and said softly, "You have learned to live together. The lesson is complete." By the time the children, now grown, came down from the hills, the keeper was seated at the heart of the field. Their eyes were closed, and their hands rested in the earth, palms open. Around them, the flowers had woven a gentle circle, their stems crossing like fingers in prayer. No one wept. They simply sat and waited as the wind moved through the valley, carrying a hush so deep it seemed to touch every heart. Then, as the sun rose, the petals nearest the keeper began to turn to silver dust, drifting upward like smoke. It did not vanish. It became light, spreading across the valley, into the river, into the sky itself. And when the last shimmer faded, a single new flower stood where the keeper had been. It was neither gold nor silver, but white. Quiet as breath, soft as dawn, its heart glowing faintly with the color of both metals mingled. The people called it the heart of balance. From that day on, the valley was never empty. Birds nested in peace, rain fell when needed, and every traveler who passed through felt lighter, as if something unseen had forgiven them. No statue was built, no shrine was raised. The story itself was enough. For balance, once tended with care, needs no keeper. It keeps us. 1,000 years passed, and the world had changed its face. Machines whispered where rivers once sang, and towers rose where hills had rested. People still spoke of fairness, but only in law, not in heart. Coins had new names, and even light was sold. Yet deep beneath the hum of this new age, the earth still remembered. One morning, in a forgotten courtyard of steel and stone, a crack appeared between the tiles. From that slender wound in the world, something pale began to rise, a stem, trembling but sure. Within days, a single white flower stood, its petals catching the sunrise in both gold and silver hue. No one planted it, no one watered it. Still, it bloomed. Those who passed by stopped, not knowing why they felt stillness in their chest. Some took photos, others left offerings of coins, paper, or prayers, but a few simply stood, eyes soft, whispering words they didn't remember learning. The circle remembers. Soon the flower's image spread across the world. Some called it a miracle, others a mystery, but the wise said quietly, "Balance has returned to watch us again." And in that watching, small changes began. A merchant forgave a debt. A judge listened instead of speaking first. A LD gave half their bread to another. The white flower never moved, never grew another beside it, yet its presence rippled through hearts like an old melody rediscovered. For balance, even in the loudest age, still knows the sound of silence and answers to it. In the city of mirrors and light, where buildings scraped the sky and people moved like rivers of glass, there lived a young archivist named Lyra. Her days were filled with numbers, contracts, and the endless hum of machines. Yet sometimes, as she walked home through the crowded streets, she would feel a whisper stir between the neon lights and passing voices. It was not sound, but remembrance. A wordless thought rising from somewhere deeper than thought itself. Keep what you can tend. At first she ignored it, blaming sleeplessness. But one evening, while cataloging old digital records from forgotten centuries, she found a file marked only with a white flower symbol. Its contents were simple, a story written in ancient tone, of silver and gold, of a river and a keeper, of balance that endured beyond time. The words pulled at her heart. She began to dream of the valley, though she had never seen one. She saw petals turning toward both shadow and light. She saw a figure smiling in the mist, hands open to the earth. "The story remembers itself," the voice said. When Lyra woke, her window was open, and a single white petal lay upon her desk, soft as light, faintly shimmering with gold. From that day she began to change, in small, quiet ways. She refused unfair orders. She helped strangers without reason. She shared her warmth in a world gone cold, and though the city never noticed her name, it began to breathe easier. Meetings grew less harsh. Neighbors began to greet one another again. Coins changed hands, but so did kindness. The old ones whispered that the keeper had returned, not in form, but in spirit, walking once more among those who had forgotten the sound of balance. And in every reflection, every glass wall, every drop of rain, Lyra would sometimes glimpse a faint shimmer beside her, smiling. The flowers remember. The white flower in the city had grown into a symbol, printed on murals, worn on pendants, whispered in songs. But as fame often does, it blurred the truth. People began to sell replicas, build shrines, and claim ownership of what was never meant to be owned. Lyra watched this unfold from her small window overlooking the city. The streets below glowed with the light of 1,000 petals projected on walls and screens. Yet something felt missing, something quiet, something true. One night, she stood before the original flower. It grew still from the same crack in the courtyard stone, unchanged by the noise around it. She knelt and whispered, "Have I failed you?" The air shimmered faintly and a voice answered, not from the flower, but from within her. "You cannot fail what was never yours to keep. Balance is not guarded, it is given." A warmth spread through her chest, gentle as dawn. And then she understood. The keeper had not returned to watch over the world. The world itself had become the keeper. Every act of fairness, every breath of kindness, every choice to give instead of take. These were the petals now. No longer bound to one field or one soul. Lyra smiled through tears. She rose, placed her hand on the cracked stone, and whispered, "Then let me give it back." In that moment, light rippled outward from her touch. Every screen in the city flickered. Every reflection shimmered with silver and gold. For a heartbeat, the entire glass city glowed like the old field. Alive, breathing, remembering. When the light faded, the flower was gone. So was Lyra. But the next morning people found something in its place. A ring of small white blossoms, circling a patch of soft soil, and carved faintly in the stone. The circle walks again. No one knew who had written it, but those who had once passed. At each other as strangers began to nod, to smile, to share. Balance had returned, not as legend but as life. Years passed after the flower's light faded from the courtyard. No one could say exactly when it began, but little by little, the world grew softer. Disputes still happened, but fewer ended in ruin. Wealth still flowed, but more often returned to where it was needed. Children grew up hearing not laws, but stories, of a keeper who was not a person, of a flower that bloomed when hearts remembered how to give. People stopped chasing perfection. They began tending to balance instead. Markets no longer opened with the sound of coin, but with the ringing of bells for gratitude. In schools, before lessons began, children drew a small circle on their desks, a ritual to remind them that fairness has no beginning and no end. And when cities shone at night, their lights reflected on rivers and glass not as a blaze of power, but as quiet constellations, each one pulsing in rhythm with a shared breath. It was not a perfect age, but it was alive, an age where forgiveness had weight, and where justice no longer needed thrones or crowns. They called it the age of quiet gold, not for riches, but for warmth, the steady, living glow that comes when people choose kindness not once, but every day. And somewhere beyond time, in the hush between worlds, the keeper's voice lingered, not as command, but as a promise fulfilled. The field has spread. The river flows through every heart. Balance no longer waits to be found. It lives in you. Then silence again. Not empty, but complete. The kind of silence where everything true continues to bloom. In the quiet that followed the age of quiet gold, words began to fade, not because they were forgotten, but because they were no longer needed. The story had done its work. The lesson had taken root, and so the chronicle that once filled scrolls, books, screens, and skies began to dissolve back into what it had always been, the living rhythm of how people treated one another. No libraries held it, no temple guarded it, yet it lived, clear and strong, in every act of mercy and in every choice to listen before speaking. Some said that if you walked far enough beyond the edges of the modern world, where the air still smelled of rain and the stars felt close enough to touch, you might find a small white flower blooming in the dark. It would turn neither toward sun nor moon, but toward you, as if to ask whether balance still lives in your hands. And if you knelt and whispered anything kind, the flower would answer, not with words, but with light that spread like a sigh through the night. In that glow, you would feel everything this story ever meant: the river's patience, the child's courage, the keeper's farewell, and the truth that never died. All things return, all things are remembered, balance endures. Then the light would fade, the stars would seem brighter, and the wind would carry the last line of the chronicle, not written, not spoken, just felt. The story has become the world. And so, the chronicle ends, not with triumph, not with sorrow, but with balance. The silver that once weighed greed, the gold that once measured pride, and the white that was born from both, have all found their place again, within us. The keeper's voice has faded, but its echo remains. In every fair choice, in every quiet act of kindness, in every time someone forgives instead of fights. Because the story was never meant to stay in books, or fields, or temples. It was meant to live, to breathe, to walk beside us. Balance is no longer something we seek. It is something we are. So the next time you stand before a choice, when pride pulls one way and mercy the other, remember the river, remember the flower, and remember this: the story has become the world, and the world remembers you.